Leaning back in his leather chair, syndicate boss Silas Sterling let a shattered wine glass drip blood onto the imported Italian marble floor. The suffocating silence of the VIP dining room broke only when he barked a lethal command in rapid, furious Japanese. Frozen in place, the rival mobsters could do nothing as their hired translator trembled too hard to speak. Death was imminent, and the room was entirely powerless to stop it, until a soft, steady voice cut through the heavy cigar smoke. "If you shoot him here, the police will arrive in exactly 4 minutes," the waitress said in flawless Kyoto dialect Japanese. Silas froze. Every gun in the room snapped toward her. Chloe Bennett had mastered the art of being invisible. In the high-stakes, high-stress world of L'Etoile, Chicago's most exclusive private dining club located just off Rush Street, invisibility was a waitress's greatest asset. She knew how to pour a $2,000 bottle of Chateau Mouton Rothschild without her shadow crossing the table. She knew how to clear porcelain plates without letting the silver clink. Most importantly, she knew how to close her ears to the conversations of the billionaires, politicians, and criminals who frequented the establishment. Tonight, however, the air in the restaurant crackled with a different kind of electricity. Victor Hastings, the owner of L'Etoile, was pacing behind the mahogany bar, dabbing his sweating forehead with a linen napkin. Victor was a man who had hosted governors and Hollywood elite without batting an eye. But tonight, his hands were shaking. "Section 4 is closed to the public," Victor whispered harshly to the staff gathered in the kitchen. "No bussers, no junior staff. Chloe, you are the only one who goes in there. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't make eye contact. You pour the water, you serve the courses, and you fade into the wallpaper. Do you understand?" Chloe nodded, tying her black apron tighter around her waist. "Who is it?" "It's the Sterling Syndicate," Victor muttered, his voice dropping to a terrified rasp. The name sent a chill through the kitchen. Everyone in the Chicago underworld knew the legend of Silas Sterling. Born to American diplomats who died in a tragic plane crash over the Sea of Japan, Silas had been orphaned in Tokyo at the age of 5. Instead of being sent back to the States, he was taken in by a powerful, old-world Yakuza patriarch who had owed a life debt to Silas's father. Silas grew up looking like an American, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes, but his mind, his soul, and his methods were forged in the ruthless fires of the Japanese underworld. When Silas returned to American soil 3 years ago to take over the family's Western operations, the local mafias laughed at him. They thought he was a confused foreigner playing dress-up. 6 months later, 3 rival bosses were found at the bottom of the Chicago River, and Silas Sterling owned the docks. He was a ghost. He operated entirely in Japanese, surrounding himself with loyal enforcers, and utterly alienated his American rivals by refusing to speak a word of English during business negotiations. "He's meeting with Richard Conway tonight," Victor added, looking at his Patek Philippe watch. "Conway is volatile. If things go south, I don't want anyone in the crossfire. Chloe, you're our best. Just keep them happy." Chloe grabbed her serving tray, her heart maintaining a steady, rhythmic beat. She wasn't afraid of the mob. She was afraid of losing her job. At 24, Chloe was drowning in debt. Her late father, a corporate liquidator, had moved their family to Kyoto for 10 years, during his prime earning years. Chloe had grown up in the heart of traditional Japan. She didn't just learn the language, she absorbed the culture, studying under strict tutors who taught her keigo, the highly complex, intensely polite, honorific Japanese used by the elite. But her father had developed a gambling addiction. He lost his firm, their savings, and eventually his life to a heart attack, leaving Chloe with a mountain of creditors breathing down her neck. Serving truffles and caviar to mobsters was the only way she could keep her head above water. At exactly 8 p.m., the front doors of L'Etoile opened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 4 men walked in, moving with a synchronized leap. He wore a charcoal bespoke suit that fit his athletic frame perfectly. His face was a mask of cold, unreadable stone. Beside him was his second in command, a towering, heavily scarred American named Dominic, who functioned as Silas's physical enforcer. Following closely behind them, looking like a dead man walking, was Richard Conway, the head of the local Irish syndicate, accompanied by a nervous, bespectacled man carrying a briefcase, his translator, Thomas. Chloe stood by the heavy oak doors of the VIP dining room, her hands clasped respectfully in front of her. As Silas walked past her, She caught the faint scent of rain, sandalwood, and ozone. He didn't even glance at her. To him, she was just a piece of the furniture, exactly the way Chloe wanted it. The first course was served in suffocating silence, seared diver scallops with a yuzu glaze. Chloe moved around the table like a phantom, refilling crystal water glasses and pouring the crisp white burgundy. Richard Conway chewed his food loudly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand despite the cloth napkin on his lap. He was a heavy-set man, flushed with cheap whiskey and arrogant confidence. He leaned heavily on the table, staring at Silas. "All right, Sterling, the food is great, but let's cut the garbage. We're here to talk about the South Side shipping containers," Richard boomed, his thick Chicago accent grating against the quiet elegance of the room. Silas slowly placed his silver fork on his plate. He didn't look at Richard. He looked at Thomas, the terrified translator sitting at the edge of the table. When Silas spoke, his voice was a deep, resonating baritone. The Japanese that rolled off his tongue was not standard Tokyo Japanese. It was sharp, clipped, and heavy, with the dangerous cadence of the underworld. Kono Buddha wa Watashi no shima de nusumi oshite iru koto, o watashi ga shiranai tademo omate iru no ka. Does this pig think I am unaware that he has been stealing from my territory? Chloe, standing by the mahogany sideboard, felt the blood drain from her face. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, adjusting a napkin on her tray to hide the slight tremble in her hands. She understood every single syllable. The venom in Silas's voice was unmistakable. Thomas, the translator, swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked at Richard, terrified to deliver the actual message. "Mr. Sterling says," Thomas stammered, adjusting his glasses. "He says he is aware of the recent activities on the South Side, and he hopes we can clarify the situation regarding the inventory." Chloe bit the inside of her cheek. That was not a translation. That was a desperate act of self-preservation. Thomas was actively watering down a death threat. Richard let out a booming laugh, leaning back in his chair. "Clarify? Yeah, I'll clarify. Tell him the tax went up. My boys unload the crates. My boys take a 20% cut. That's the cost of doing business in my city. If he doesn't like it, he can take his boats back to Tokyo." Thomas went pale. Translating that insult to a Yakuza boss was essentially a suicide note. Thomas turned to Silas and spoke in broken, highly flawed Japanese. "Ano, risado-san wa, rodo, shano kuryo ga agata to itte imasu. Niju pasento no. Tesuryo ga hitsuyo desu." Mister. Richard says the workers' wages have gone up. A 20% fee is required. Silas's blue eyes narrowed infinitesimally. He wasn't stupid. Even if he refused to speak English, his sharp intellect could easily detect the discrepancy between Richard's arrogant, mocking tone and Thomas's meek, sanitized translation. Silas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He stared directly into Richard's eyes, but spoke to Thomas. "Sono zomotsu o hikizuri dashite, inu ni kuwasero to chutaero. Konya, kare no shihaika ni aru subete no soko o moyasu. Tell him I will drag out his entrails and feed them to the dogs. Tonight, I will burn down every warehouse under his control." Chloe's breath hitched. She accidentally clinked the water pitcher against a glass, a microscopic sound, but in the tense silence, it felt like a gunshot. Dominic, Silas's enforcer, shot her a lethal glare. Chloe immediately bowed her head, stepping back into the shadows. "God, they're going to kill him right here," she thought. "They're going to pull out guns and ruin Victor's life, my life, everything." Thomas was now visibly shaking. He wiped his face with a napkin. Mr. Conway, Mr. Sterling strongly opposes the 20% fee. He suggests that a renegotiation is necessary to avoid conflict." Richard slammed his fist on the table, rattling the fine china. "Renegotiation? Tell this fake samurai that I don't renegotiate. I own the unions. I own the Port Authority. He pays the 20% or his next shipment of electronics ends up at the bottom of Lake Michigan." Chloe watched in absolute horror as the fatal miscommunication unfolded. Richard thought he was intimidating a stubborn businessman. Silas knew he was sitting across from a thief who was currently disrespecting him to his face. And Thomas, the coward in the middle, was building a bridge of lies that was about to collapse violently. Silas didn't wait for the translation. He had heard the tone. He saw the fist hit the table. Silas turned his head slightly, looking over his shoulder at Dominic. He gave a single, quiet command in Japanese. Kono heya no doa o lock shiro. Honyakusha wa ikashiro ke. Buta no atama o fukito base. Lock the doors to this room. Keep the translator alive. Blow the pig's head off. Dominic didn't hesitate. He didn't speak Japanese fluently, but he knew the kill codes. He immediately reached inside his tailored suit jacket, his fingers wrapping around the grip of a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol. At the exact same moment, the two guards standing by the door moved to lock the heavy oak double doors. Chloe's mind raced at 1,000 miles an hour. If the doors locked, Richard Conway was dead. If Richard Conway died in L'Etoile, the police would raid the place. The media would swarm. Victor would lose his liquor license, the restaurant would be seized as a crime scene, and Chloe would be out of a job, out of money, and likely interrogated by the FBI for weeks. Her creditors would find her. Her life would be completely over. There was no time to think. Instinct, forged by years of survival and desperate necessity, took over. Chloe stepped forward, holding the heavy, uncorked bottle of Bordeaux. She walked smoothly, rapidly, placing herself perfectly in the firing line between Dominic and Richard Conway. Dominic paused, his gun halfway out of his jacket, glaring at the waitress who had just foolishly stepped into his line of sight. "Move, sweetheart," he growled under his breath. Chloe didn't look at him. She turned gracefully toward Silas, pretending to reach for his empty wine glass. As she did, she intentionally tilted her wrist. A single dark red drop of the expensive Bordeaux fell from the lip of the bottle, landing precisely on the stark white cuff of Silas Sterling's tailored shirt. The entire room froze. Richard Conway stopped breathing. Thomas let out a pathetic squeak. Dominic pulled his weapon completely out, aiming the black suppressor directly at the side of Chloe's head. "You stupid bitch," Dominic hissed, slipping his finger inside the trigger guard. Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't look at the gun. She didn't look at the terrified Irish mobster. She slowly placed the bottle of wine on the table, took one step back, and sank into a perfect, deep, 90-degree bow, a saikei, the highest form of respect in Japanese culture. When she spoke, her voice was crystal clear, steady, and rang through the silent room like a silver bell. "Makoto ni moshiwake gozaimasen, Sterling-sama. Shikashi. Moshi kono heya de chi ga nagarereba. Sante buru saki de shokuji oshite iru shikei ga. Anata no buka ga juni tama o komeru mae ni. Kono tatemono o fusasuru desho." I beg your profound forgiveness, Lord Sterling. However, if blood is shed in this room, the city's police commissioner, who is currently dining 3 tables away, will have this building surrounded before your men can reload their weapons. The absolute shock in the room was palpable. It wasn't just that the invisible American waitress had spoken Japanese, it was how she spoke it. She didn't use the modern, casual Japanese taught in university classrooms or the rough street slang used by the Yakuza. She used flawless, archaic Sankeigo, the deeply respectful, complex, honorific language reserved for addressing royalty or the highest-ranking patriarchs. Furthermore, her accent was not American. It was the soft, lilting, aristocratic dialect of the old Kyoto tea houses. Dominic's hand wavered, his eyes darting to his boss for permission to fire. Silas Sterling sat completely paralyzed. His piercing blue eyes, usually devoid of any human emotion, were wide with genuine shock. He stared at the top of Chloe's head as she remained bowed, refusing to rise until she was acknowledged, adhering perfectly to the ancient customs of his adoptive country. Richard Conway looked around wildly. What the hell is going on? What did she say? Thomas, what did the waitress say? Thomas was hyperventilating, gripping the edges of the table. I don't know, Mr. Conway, it sounded like. Shakespearean Japanese. I didn't understand half the words. Silas raised a single finger. Instantly, Dominic lowered his weapon, stepping back into the shadows, though his eyes never left Chloe. The guards by the door took their hands off the locks. Silas slowly stood up from his chair. He was intimidatingly tall, towering over Chloe's bowed form. He stepped around the table, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the marble floor. He stopped mere inches in front of her. "Kao o agenasai," Silas commanded softly. "Raise your face." Chloe slowly straightened her posture. She kept her gaze respectfully lowered, looking at the knot of his silk tie rather than directly into his eyes. another subtle show of cultural respect. Her heart was beating so violently against her ribs, she feared he could hear it. Silas studied her. He looked at her cheap uniform, her scuffed black shoes, and then at the fierce, unyielding calm in her posture. Ome Waderda? Silas asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, mesmerizing whisper. Who are you? Watashi watada no we torasu desu, Chloe replied smoothly, perfectly keeping the rhythm of the language. I am merely a waitress. Soshite, anata no tuyaku ga, kono otoko no bogen o kakushite, iru koto o osorete iru, tada no bokansha desu. And a bystander who fears that your translator has been hiding this man's insults from you. Silas's eyes flashed. He slowly turned his head to look at Thomas. The temperature in the room plummeted to absolute zero. She speaks the truth? Silas asked. And for the first time since he had returned to American soil, Silas Sterling spoke in perfect, unaccented English. Richard Conway dropped his cigar. Thomas wet his pants. Silas looked back down at Chloe, a slow, terrifying, and utterly fascinated smile spreading across his face. Dominic, Silas ordered, never taking his eyes off the waitress. Take the Irishman and his translator out through the kitchen loading dock. Break the translator's jaw so he can never lie again. If Conway screams, shoot him in the knees. Wait! Sterling! You can't! Richard screamed, but Dominic had already crossed the room, grabbing the heavy mobster by the back of the neck and dragging him backward while the other guards seized the sobbing translator. The doors opened and closed in seconds, leaving the VIP room in complete silence once again. Silas reached out and picked up the bottle of Bordeaux Chloe had placed on the table. He poured a small amount into a clean glass, took a sip, and looked at her. You just saved my syndicate from an incredibly messy public shootout, little bird, Silas said softly, swirling the red liquid. But more importantly, you have my full attention. The heavy oak doors of the VIP room remained shut. The silence that followed Richard Conway's forced exit was heavier than before, thick with the adrenaline of a narrowly avoided bloodbath. Chloe stood perfectly still, her hands trembling slightly against the crisp fabric of her black apron. She kept her eyes on the imported Italian marble floor. She had just broken the cardinal rule of l'étoile. She had made herself visible. Worse, she had inserted herself into the volatile politics of the Sterling syndicate. Silas Sterling slowly walked back to his leather chair. The faint scent of sandalwood and rain seemed to amplify in the quiet room. He sat down, steepled his long fingers together, and studied her with an intensity that made Chloe's skin prickle. You speak perfect Sankego, Silas said, his English flawless, carrying a smooth, mid-Atlantic cadence that completely betrayed his terrifying Yakuza persona. And your accent. It belongs to the tea houses of the Gion district. It is not something an American learns from Rosetta Stone or a liberal arts college. Explain. Chloe swallowed hard. The absolute command in his voice left no room for hesitation. My father was a corporate liquidator, she began, her voice steadying as she fell back into the familiar, painful history. Arthur Bennett. He handled overseas mergers for tech conglomerates. We relocated to Kyoto when I was 7. We lived in a traditional machiya in Nakagyo Ward for 10 years. My father believed that to do business in Japan, one had to assimilate completely. He hired private tutors for me. Strict traditionalists. Arthur Bennett, Silas mused, his blue eyes narrowing slightly as he accessed a mental database of corporate players. He brokered the Katsura Tech buyout in 2014, a brilliant man, but he vanished from the financial sector 5 years ago. He developed a gambling addiction, Chloe said softly, the shame still a bitter pill on her tongue. Baccarat, high-stakes underground tables. He lost his firm. He lost our house. We moved back to Chicago, and he started borrowing from the wrong people to chase his losses. 2 years ago, his heart gave out. He left me with nothing but his debts. Silas leaned forward, his gaze dropping to her scuffed, non-slip waitress shoes. Who holds the paper on his debt? Chloe hesitated. Speaking the name out loud in Chicago was dangerous enough, but speaking it to a rival syndicate boss felt like a death wish. The West Side Crew, a man named Arthur Sullivan. The principal was $200,000. With the compounding VIG, it's currently sitting at $450,000. I surrender 70% of my paychecks and tips to his collectors every Friday. A dark, dangerous amusement flickered in Silas's eyes. He picked up his crystal glass and took a slow sip of the Bordeaux. So, You are an indentured servant pouring $2,000 wine for the very men who hold your leash. The irony is almost poetic. It's survival, Mr. Sterling, Chloe replied, her chin lifting just a fraction. And tonight, I ensured your survival in this restaurant. If the police commissioner outside had heard gunshots, your men would be in holding cells, and your shipping containers would be seized by Customs and Border Protection by midnight. The door clicked open. Dominic stepped back into the room, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit. He glanced at Chloe with thinly veiled disdain, then looked to his boss. Conway is in the alley. The translator won't be talking for a few months. His jaw is wired shut. Do we finish the Irishman? No, Silas said, not taking his eyes off Chloe. Conway is a fool, but his death tonight would cause unnecessary logistical ripples at the ports. Let him live with the terror of knowing how close he came to the abyss. Silas stood up, buttoning his charcoal suit jacket. Dominic, clear my schedule for tomorrow morning, and bring the car around. We are leaving. Understood, Dominic grunted, though his eyes lingered suspiciously on the waitress. He turned and exited the room. Silas walked toward Chloe. As he drew near, the sheer physical presence of the man was overwhelming. He stopped just a foot away, looking down at her. My entire operation in this city relies on a carefully constructed facade, Silas said softly. The American mobsters think I am a foreign savage who only understands violence and Japanese. They let their guard down. They speak openly in front of me, thinking I cannot understand their English. It gives me a profound tactical advantage. But to maintain this illusion, I must use a translator. And as you witnessed tonight, translators are cowards. They sanitize insults. They alter the tone. They try to play diplomat when I require a sword. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sleek, matte black business card. He held it out between two fingers. I need a new voice, Silas stated. Someone who understands the absolute, razor-thin nuances of Japanese honorifics, but who also understands the ruthless pragmatism of the American underworld. Someone who will translate a death threat without making her voice shake. Chloe stared at the card. It had no name, only a gold-embossed telephone number. You want me to work for the mob? I want you to work for me, Silas corrected smoothly. I operate as a legitimate logistics and shipping conglomerate on paper. You will be hired as my executive cultural attaché. A standard W-2, a corner office, and a very comprehensive dental plan. His lips curved into a faint, predatory smile. As a signing bonus, I will personally visit Arthur Sullivan tomorrow. Your father's debt will be erased permanently. Chloe's breath hitched. $450,000. Freedom. The ability to sleep through the night without fearing a knock at the door from men carrying brass knuckles. But the price was tying her life to a man who ordered executions as easily as he ordered a second course. If I say no? She asked, her voice a quiet whisper. Then I leave a generous tip on the table and you go back to being invisible, Silas replied, his tone devoid of threat yet chillingly absolute. But you and I both know, little bird, that you were not meant for a cage. He dropped the card onto her serving tray. Without another word, Silas Sterling turned and walked out of the VIP room, fading into the shadows of the restaurant, leaving Chloe alone with the shattered glass, the spilled wine, and a choice that would permanently alter the trajectory of her life. 48 hours later, Chloe Bennett did not look like a waitress. She stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite of the Sterling Syndicate's penthouse atop the St. Regis, Chicago. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger. Gone was the stained black apron and the frantic, exhausted posture. In their place was a woman wrapped in a tailored dove-gray Accra suit that cost more than her car. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe chignon, and a pair of dark designer glasses sat on her nose, giving her an aura of unapproachable intellect. Dominic stood by the door, his massive frame blocking the exit, arms crossed over his chest. The boss is ready, he grunted, his voice laced with clear disapproval. Just remember the rules, Bennett. You don't speak unless he nods. You translate his Japanese exactly as he says it, and you translate their English exactly as they say it. You don't editorialize. You don't think. You're just a highly paid parrot. I understand, Dominic, Chloe said calmly, picking up a leather folio. She had spent the last 2 days locked in a corporate apartment Silas had provided, memorizing the dossiers of every major player in the Chicago Port Authority. She knew the stakes. She followed Dominic out of the suite and into the private elevator. They descended to the underground garage, where Silas was already seated in the back of a black Mercedes Maybach S 680, its engine purring like a caged beast. Chloe slid into the plush leather seat opposite Silas. He was dressed impeccably in a midnight blue suit, reviewing a tablet. He didn't look up as the car pulled out of the garage, blending seamlessly into the rainy Chicago traffic. "Today we meet with Alderman Patrick Hayes," Silas said, speaking English, his eyes still on the screen. "Hayes controls the zoning board for the south branch of the river. I need him to approve the expansion of our primary logistics warehouse. He has been stalling for 3 months." "The dossier said Hayes is a reformer," Chloe noted, recalling the files. "He ran on an anti-corruption platform." Silas let out a dark, quiet chuckle. "Every politician in this city is a reformer until they need to pay for their mistress's condo in the Gold Coast. Hayes isn't stalling because he is moral. He is stalling because he wants a larger bribe. But he is a coward. He won't ask for it directly. He will use bureaucratic red tape to strangle my operations until I offer the money." Silas finally looked up, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. "Today, you establish your reputation. Hayes expects a broken, submissive translator. He expects me to be frustrated by his legal jargon. You will show him that the Sterling Syndicate understands exactly what game he is playing." The Maybach pulled up to the curb outside the exclusive Union League Club of Chicago. The air was crisp, the wind howling off Lake Michigan. Chloe walked a half step behind Silas as they entered the opulent wood-paneled building, Dominic trailing closely behind. They were escorted to a private, soundproofed cigar lounge on the 4th floor. Alderman Patrick Hayes was already there, a balding, nervous-looking man in his late 50s, sweating through his cheap tweed suit. He was accompanied by a sharp-eyed lawyer holding a thick stack of manila folders. Hayes stood up abruptly as Silas entered. "Mr. Sterling, good of you to come." Silas ignored the outstretched hand. He sat down slowly in a high-backed leather chair, exuding absolute, terrifying authority. He gestured for Chloe to sit beside him. Chloe sat down, crossing her legs, resting the leather folio on her lap. She looked directly at Hayes. "Sterling-sama wa anata no jikan ni kanchashite orimas," Chloe said, her voice dripping with formal, icy sonkeigo. She paused, then switched to perfect English for Hayes. "Mr. Sterling acknowledges your time, Alderman." Hayes blinked, momentarily thrown by the elegant, aristocratic tone of the young woman. He cleared his throat. "Yes, well, let's get to the point. The expansion of the South Branch warehouse. I've reviewed the blueprints with the zoning committee. Unfortunately, the proposed structure violates the Municipal Code 1724, specifically regarding environmental impact on the riverbed." Hayes leaned forward, a greasy smile touching his lips. "It's a very complicated legal matter, Mr. Sterling. The environmental impact studies alone will take 18 months, unless, of course, we can find a specialized consultant to expedite the review process. The consulting fee, naturally, would be substantial. Say, $2 million, donated to a specific civic PAC." Chloe listened, her mind racing. It was a classic shakedown. Hayes was hiding behind environmental code to extort a $2 million bribe. She turned to Silas. She could have just translated the words. She could have just been a parrot. But Chloe remembered the days her father spent liquidating corrupt firms, finding the hidden loopholes in legally airtight documents. She remembered reading municipal codes to help her father try and save his sinking company. Chloe leaned in close to Silas. She spoke in rapid, hushed Japanese, ensuring Hayes and his lawyer couldn't understand a single syllable. "Kare wa nimondoru no wairo o yokyu shite imas," Chloe translated softly. "He is demanding a $2 million bribe." She didn't stop there. "Shikashi, kare wa uso otsuite imasu. Sonotochi wa senkyuhyaku hachiju, nen ni kogyo yotashite kitei sarate ori, kankyo ho no taisho gai desu. Kare ga itte iru jore wa shinki kaihatsu ni no miteikyo saramasu. Anata no soko wa sochiku de ari, shinki de wa arimasen." However, he is lying. That land was grandfathered for industrial use in 1980 and is exempt from the environmental impact law. The code he cites only applies to new developments. Your warehouse is an expansion, not a new build. Silas's eyes widened a fraction of an inch. A thrill of genuine surprise and profound satisfaction shot through him. He looked at the beautiful, sharp-minded woman beside him. She wasn't just translating, she was weaponizing the language. She was reading the legal matrix of the enemy. Silas turned his gaze back to Hayes. The temperature in the room plummeted. Silas spoke in a low, rumbling baritone, his Japanese sharp as a katana. Kono Nezumi ni tsutairo. Watashi no tochi wa senkyuhyaku hachiju, nen karakojyo, yo nishite sarate iru. Kankyo wa tekyo saranai. Moshi kare ga kono tawagoto de watashi, okyo hakushio to suru nara, watashi wa asu no asa. Kare no aijin ga rush street de shoyu shite, iru kondo no shikin geno, kokuze kyoku niriku suru. Chloe turned back to Alderman Hayes. She didn't smile. Her face was a mask of perfect, terrifying composure. Mr. Sterling wishes to remind you, Chloe said, her English crisp and lethal, that the South Branch parcel was grandfathered for heavy industrial use in 1980. Municipal Code 1724 does not apply to structural expansions, only to new developments. Therefore, your environmental review is entirely fabricated. Hayes went completely pale. His lawyer dropped his pen. Chloe leaned forward, perfectly mirroring Silas's intimidating posture. Furthermore, Mr. Sterling suggests that if you attempt to use fabricated legalities to extort him again, he will personally forward the financial records of the luxury condominium your mistress currently occupies on Rush Street directly to the Internal Revenue Service. The silence in the cigar lounge was absolute. Hayes looked like he was about to have a stroke. He looked from Chloe to the unreadable, stone-cold face of Silas Sterling. The American politician suddenly realized he was not dealing with a dumb foreign mobster. He was dealing with an apex predator who had completely outmaneuvered him. I see, Hayes stammered, wiping his brow with a trembling hand. Perhaps the zoning committee misread the grandfather clause. I will have the permits expedited and stamped by tomorrow morning. No consulting fee required. Excellent, Chloe said smoothly. She stood up, closing her leather folio. Silas stood simultaneously. Neither of them offered to shake hands. As they walked back to the Maybach, Dominic trailing behind, Silas remained silent. It wasn't until the heavy doors of the luxury car closed, isolating them from the world, that Silas finally spoke. You didn't just translate, Chloe, Silas murmured, the use of her first name sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. You analyzed his legal strategy, dismantled it, and handed me the weapon to execute him. You hired an executive cultural attaché, Chloe replied, her heart pounding, though she kept her voice perfectly level. My father taught me that culture isn't just how people speak, it's how people lie. Silas stared at her, a dark, consuming fire burning in his blue eyes. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. The touch was electric, dangerous, and completely intoxicating. You are going to be a very dangerous asset, little bird, Silas whispered, his face inches from hers. But outside the tinted windows of the Maybach, watching from the shadows of an alleyway across the street, a figure pulled out a burner phone. The figure snapped a photograph of the Maybach, and then a clear shot of Chloe Bennett as she stepped out of the Union League Club. The ghost has a new voice, the text message read, sent to a restricted number deep within the Chicago outfit. Find out who she is, and find out how to break her. For 7 days, Chloe Bennett lived a dual life. By day, she sat in the sunlit, glass-walled conference rooms of the Sterling Syndicate's legitimate front Sterling Global Logistics, translating shipping manifests and decoding the subtle, passive-aggressive emails of Chicago's corrupt elite. By night, she descended into the city's underground, standing at Silas's right hand in smoke-filled basements and private casino backrooms, wielding her flawless Japanese like a scalpel to dissect the lies of rival mobsters. She was no longer invisible. In the span of a week, the whispers on the street had shifted. They no longer spoke only of the ghost. They spoke of his shadow, the dark-haired American woman who spoke the old language and possessed a mind sharp enough to terrify politicians. But visibility comes with a terrifying price. It was a Tuesday evening. A heavy, relentless thunderstorm had settled over the city, turning the streets of Logan Square into slick, black mirrors. Chloe had requested 2 hours away from Silas's protective detail to return to her dilapidated apartment one last time. She needed to pack the few personal items that actually mattered: her father's silver pocket watch, her mother's old photographs, and a few books before permanently relocating to the secure suite at the St. Regis. The L train rumbled overhead, rattling the single-pane windows of her studio apartment. Chloe taped up a cardboard box, the rhythmic drumming of the rain masking the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The door didn't open with a knock. It exploded inward, the deadbolt splintering the cheap wood doorframe. Chloe gasped, stumbling backward over a stack of books as three men crowded into the tiny, damp room. Two were massive, thick-necked enforcers, wearing damp leather jackets. The third man, stepping over the ruined door with a look of utter disdain, was Arthur Sullivan. Sullivan was the head of the West Side crew, the ruthless loan shark who owned her father's debt. He was a gaunt man in his early 60s, with a face mapped by broken capillaries and cold, dead eyes. Well, Sullivan rasped, shaking the rain from his fedora. I have to admit, when my boys sent me that picture from outside the Union League Club, I didn't believe it. Little Chloe Bennett, the waitress who empties her pockets for me every Friday, riding in a Maybach with Silas Sterling. Chloe's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her training over the last week kicked in. She didn't cower. She stood up straight, brushing the dust off her jeans. You have no business being here, Arthur, mister. Sterling's legal team contacted you yesterday to wire the remaining balance of the debt. You're getting your money. Sullivan laughed, a dry, grating sound. He stepped further into the apartment, picking up her father's silver pocket watch from the kitchen counter. He examined it, his thumb tracing the engraved initials. I don't want the money, sweetheart, Sullivan said, slipping the watch into his coat pocket. 450 grand is pocket change. What I want is the Port Authority. Sterling moved in and choked out my supply lines. I've lost millions in the last 6 months because that arrogant Japanese-speaking freak refuses to pay the Chicago tax. Sullivan signaled to his men. The two enforcers moved to block the window and the broken doorway. You see, Chloe? Sullivan continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Sterling is a fortress. We couldn't find a weakness. But every fortress has a back door. And apparently, you're it. You're going to help me set up a meeting. You're going to feed him the wrong translation, walk him into a warehouse on the west side, and let my boys take care of the rest. He will kill you before you even draw a weapon, Chloe said, her voice eerily calm despite the terror freezing her veins. You have no idea what he is capable of. Oh, I think I do, Sullivan sneered, stepping into her personal space. The smell of stale gin and wet wool rolled off him. But you're going to do exactly what I say, because if you don't, I'm not just going to kill you. I'm going to ruin the memory of your precious father. Chloe's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? You think Arthur Bennett lost his company because he had a run of bad luck at the baccarat tables? Sullivan grinned, showing yellowed teeth. Your father wasn't a gambler, Chloe. He was a mark. We needed his corporate liquidation licenses to launder dirty casino money through shell corporations. So, we drugged his drinks, we rigged the tables, we manufactured the debt, and when he couldn't pay, we threatened to slaughter you and your mother if he went to the police. The stress gave him the heart attack. I didn't just buy his debt, little bird. I built the cage that killed him. The world seemed to stop spinning. The air in the apartment turned to lead. The agonizing years of poverty, the shame of her father's supposed addiction, the crushing weight of the debt, it was all a lie. It was a manufactured execution. A blinding, white-hot rage ignited in Chloe's chest. It was a fury so absolute, so consuming, that it completely eradicated her fear. You killed him, Chloe whispered, her hands balling into fists. And now I own you, Sullivan spat. Grab her. The two enforcers lunged forward. But before their hands could touch her, the shadow in the hallway moved. There was no shout. There was no warning. There was only the muffled, mechanical pff of a suppressed weapon. The enforcer on the left dropped to the floor, 2 hollow point rounds embedded perfectly in the back of his skull. The second enforcer spun around, reaching for his weapon, but a massive hand reached through the doorway, grabbed the man by the throat, and violently slammed his head against the exposed brick wall. Dominic stepped over the unconscious body, his face an emotionless mask of brutal efficiency. Arthur Sullivan froze, his hand trembling, as he reached for the revolver in his waistband. I wouldn't, a voice commanded from the shadows. Silas Sterling walked into the apartment. He didn't look at the dead man on the floor. He didn't look at Sullivan. His piercing blue eyes locked instantly onto Chloe. scanning her from head to toe, ensuring she was unharmed. Only when he saw the fierce, unyielding fire in her eyes did he turn his attention to the loan shark. Silas was wearing a black trench coat over his tailored suit, his hair slightly damp from the rain. He looked like an apex predator that had just cornered its prey. "Sterling," Sullivan stammered, backing away until his shoulders hit the kitchen cabinets. "This is outfit territory. You're out of bounds." Silas slowly walked toward him, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the tiny room. When he spoke, he didn't use Japanese. He used perfect, terrifyingly calm English, ensuring Sullivan understood every single syllable of his doom. "You made 3 catastrophic miscalculations tonight, Arthur," Silas said softly, stopping just inches from the trembling mobster. "First, you assumed my executive cultural attaché travels anywhere in the city without my shadow." Silas reached out with lightning speed, gripping Sullivan's wrist and twisting it violently. The snap of bone echoed in the room. Sullivan shrieked, dropping his revolver to the floor. "Second," Silas continued, completely ignoring the man's screams, "you assumed I would allow a parasite like you to dictate terms to my syndicate." Silas reached into Sullivan's coat pocket and retrieved Arthur Bennett's silver pocket watch. He wiped it carefully with his thumb and handed it back to Chloe. She took it, her fingers brushing against Silas's, a spark of dark, mutual understanding passing between them. "And third," Silas whispered, his voice dropping to a demonic register, "you confessed to murdering her father. You gave her the motive, and you gave me the justification." Wait, Sterling, we can make a deal," Sullivan begged, dropping to his knees, clutching his broken wrist. "Take the ports. Take the west side. Just let me walk out of here." Silas looked at Chloe. The decision wasn't his. It was hers. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain lashing against the window. Chloe looked at the pathetic, broken man who had orchestrated the destruction of her family. She remembered her father's lifeless body. She remembered the years of serving arrogant men in a stained apron, terrified of the shadows. Chloe looked up at Silas. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She spoke in flawless, razor-sharp Japanese. "Kere o kono heya kara dashite," Chloe commanded, her voice cold as ice. "Take him out of this room. So shite. Watashi no chichi ga ajiwata, no to onaji ketsumatsu o adashite. Shinzo hatomaru made, kofuka no ataete." And give him the exact same end my father experienced. Give him terror until his heart stops. A slow, profoundly dark smile spread across Silas's face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated reverence. He had found his translator, yes, but more importantly, he had found his queen. Silas nodded to Dominic. "Take him to the river. Make it hurt." Dominic hauled the screaming loan shark out of the apartment by his collar, dragging him into the stormy Chicago night. The penthouse at the St. Regis was silent, suspended high above the glittering, rain-slicked grid of Chicago. The city below looked like a circuit board of amber and white lights, oblivious to the blood that had just been spilled in its shadows. Chloe stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the skyline. She had taken a hot shower, washing away the smell of gunpowder and her damp, ruined apartment. She was wearing a silk robe Silas had provided, the heavy fabric pooling around her bare feet. She heard the quiet clink of crystal glasses. Silas walked up behind her, offering her a glass of the $2,000 Chateau Mouton Rothschild, the exact same vintage she had poured for him a week ago in L'Etoile. Chloe took the glass, her fingers wrapping around the delicate stem. She took a sip. It tasted entirely different when you weren't terrified of dropping the bottle. "Are you afraid?" Silas asked quietly, his presence a warm, immovable wall at her back. "Of what?" Chloe replied, keeping her eyes on the city. "Of Arthur Sullivan's crew coming for retaliation?" "Of me," Silas corrected. He stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood and rain wrapping around her. "You stepped into a world of violence tonight, Chloe. You ordered a man's death. There is no unringing that bell. The civilized world you once knew is officially gone." Chloe slowly turned around to face him. The towering, lethal syndicate boss looked down at her, his blue eyes searching her face for any sign of regret, any sign of the fragile waitress he had rescued. She didn't give him one. "My civilized world died the day my father had his heart attack," Chloe said, her voice steady and absolute. "For 2 years, I lived in a cage built by monsters. Tonight, I realized something important." "And what is that?" Silas murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "If you want to survive in a city of monsters," Chloe said, stepping into his space, tilting her head up to meet his eyes, You have to stand beside the devil. Silas let out a low, breathy sound that was half laugh, half growl. He reached out, his large hands cupping her face, his thumbs gently tracing the line of her cheekbones. The cold, calculating facade he wore for the world completely melted away, leaving only raw, burning possession. I didn't hire you just because you speak Sonkego, little bird, Silas whispered, his forehead resting against hers. I hired you because when Dominic pulled a gun on Richard Conway, you didn't run. You didn't scream. You stepped into the line of fire and bent the room to your will. You have the soul of a syndicate boss. You just needed the throne. He kissed her, and it wasn't gentle. It was a collision of power, a sealing of a dark, unbreakable pact. Chloe kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands tangling in his dark hair, anchoring herself to the storm that was Silas Sterling. The debt was gone. The waitress was dead. From the ashes of her father's ruin, a new empire was going to rise. 1 year later, the VIP dining room at L'Etoile was suffocatingly quiet. Victor Hastings, the owner, stood nervously by the mahogany bar, wiping sweat from his brow as he watched the new staff pour the wine. At the center of the table sat the remaining heads of the Chicago outfit. They looked nervous, their eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors. They had come to negotiate a truce. The port wars had decimated their ranks, and the Sterling Syndicate now controlled 70% of the city's underground logistics. The doors opened. Silas Sterling walked in, radiating absolute, terrifying authority. But he did not walk alone, and he did not sit at the head of the table. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table for his wife. Chloe Sterling sat down, smoothing the skirt of her immaculate black Tom Ford suit. She wore her father's silver pocket watch on a chain around her neck, resting against her collarbone like a badge of honor. Dominic stood silently behind her right shoulder. The Italian mobsters stared at her in stunned silence. They remembered the rumors. They remembered the waitress. But the woman sitting before them was a queen, radiating a cold, untouchable power. Chloe looked at the terrified men. She didn't need a translator. She didn't need to hide in the shadows. She leaned forward, steepled her fingers, and smiled a smile that made their blood run cold. Gentlemen, Chloe said, her English crisp, lethal, and dripping with authority. Let us discuss the new tax on your survival. What an incredible journey from a terrified, indebted waitress to the undisputed queen of the Chicago underworld. Chloe's story proves that sometimes the greatest weapon you possess isn't a gun, but your mind, your culture, and the courage to step out of the shadows and claim your power. Silas and Chloe didn't just survive the Mafia wars. They completely rewrote the rules of the game together. If you are captivated by this intense, high-stakes Mafia romance, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to show your support for Chloe's epic revenge. Share this video with your friends who love a brilliant plot twist and a fiercely intelligent heroine. And most importantly, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another thrilling, real-life inspired story. Drop a comment below, would you have stepped in front of the gun like Chloe did? Let us know.